So ABCD is an acronym for Access to Biological Collection Data. It doesn't really matter if you don't know this. It's just commonly referred to as ABCD. And Darwin Core, often abbreviated as DwC, are two of the most prominent tetraic standards. Both deal with very similar data and have been around for quite a while. So they, there is an overlap in terms of the content, but both standards have different approaches on how they handle and model the data. So if we look at this, bit simplified graphics, if we look at the number of concepts that are represented by a data standard and what I called technical restrictiveness, so starting from just a loose list of terms to something more semantic connections between the terms towards a fixed structure and widget format, then it used to be that Darwin Core was more in this less technical restrictive with a fewer number of terms, so more a list of terms with high flexibility and concentrating, as the name already implies, on the core terms to describe occurrence and observation data. ABCD, on the other hand, has a lot more rigid structure. It was defined as an XML schema. It has quite a huge number of concepts, depending on how you count, whether you're counting the elements within the XML tree that don't contain any nodes in itself. Then we have around 1,400 concepts, give or take, depending on which flavor and variety you have, plus a couple of additional extensions, which also have a few, which also add a lot more elements to the ABCD ecosystem. So this was the status a couple of years ago, but times change and standards evolve. So over time, a lot more terms were added to Darwin Core, and there were a lot more extensions. There was also Darwin Core RDF guide on how to use Darwin Core terms within a more semantic structure. On the other hand, with the ABCD3 project, we try to reduce the number of concepts by breaking up this XML structure and reusing individual concepts, and also doing some cleanup where we realized over time that ABCD was a bit over modeled, a bit over engineered, and we now have an ABCD3 ontology that is a bit more flexible. It uses semantic structures independent of the XML structure. So both standards, who were previously within their own niches and covered their own use cases, have now moved towards each other, which is why the idea came that now that they are occupying the same space, so to speak, to improve on the alignment of those two standards. So with this setting, Stan Bloom initiated a Zoom call in the May of last year to discuss the alignment of those two standards and other related standards with a group of people who are heavily involved from the TDWG community, but also a bit beyond. And it was a really productive meeting. We had the minutes are shared in the notes for this session today. So the general consensus of this discussion was that an alignment between the two standards would be greatly beneficial to the TDWG community. So everybody agreed, yeah, this is something we should do. It is important, but also everybody kind of realized that this is quite a big task at hand. So there was a email discussions in the week after this initial call. Steve Beskoff wrote a really detailed blog post comparing the ABCD data model to the Darwin Core data model. This is also linked. And then at the Biodiversity Next conference last year, Stan gave a presentation about this group. And then not much happened. So for the past, yeah, if we kind of consider that the preparation for the Biodiversity Next conference was mainly just gathering the information that was already worked on. So a little over a year ago now, nothing has happened. And yeah, this brings us to the problems we currently have. So why has nothing happened? Everybody agreed that this was a really interesting and important task. So what has happened? Well, first of all, we have to realize that this is a really big task we have here. So we have two standards, both being quite, yeah, quite complex, quite a lot of elements, quite a lot of thought that went into these structures. It's not just easy to align them. Also, the alignment itself, it's like a really vague term. So it's kind of hard to get everybody to a common understanding. What does alignment mean? Does it mean that we should make a new standard that combines both of them, or just have both standards interact a bit better? So we have a big task and not a really good way of handling it, because everybody has kind of different expectations about this. And yeah. Also, there's the legacy support. So whatever we do, we have to be aware that both standards are used in a huge variety of different software products, different different institutions, different implementations. It's not easy just changing something like that, especially if this involves changing the entire architecture underneath, the entire way this data is modeled. And all of the people who were involved in the initial call, and I guess, yeah, all of the people who are here today that would be interested in contributing have pretty much the same problem, that we all have other things to do. We all have only very limited time to work on such additional additional tasks. So, and last but not least, this is something that I guess people don't really like to discuss, but it is in our head, and we have to be aware of this, because otherwise we might end up in other dead ends. That with those two standards, there's a lot of politics and history involved. Both standards have been around for quite a while. There have been a lot of discussions in the history of both standards in terms of how should things be modeled, and why is one way better than the other way. And there are a lot of people a lot more qualified than I am to talk about this, because I haven't been around for most of that time. But it is something to be aware. So both standards have their own branding. Everybody knows what Darwin Core is. Everybody knows what, but people within our community are generally aware what Darwin Core is, are generally aware what Abcd is. So there comes a lot of history with those standards, and things that cannot just be easily ignored or skipped over. Otherwise, we might run into problems later on. So that brings us to the actual big question: how do you eat an elephant? I guess this, a lot of big tasks come to this question eventually, and well, the answer is, of course, you don't, because it's a vulnerable species, and person in the biodiversity community should be aware of this. But let's go to the core of this question: how do you eat an hypothetical elephant that is a metaphor for the task in front of you? And as the answer is, one bite at a time. So you have to start somewhere. We have to get started doing something and get the discussion going. There's a lot of advantages and disadvantages in over planning things. So getting yeah, making big and detailed plans that in the end might lead to nowhere, but on the other hand, discussing actual content is, or discussing the steps at hand is a vital first step. So that brings us to the scope of this workshop. The 2 hours we have today are too short to do any actual work. So just so we have a common understanding, the actual work of this working group will not be done within the next now 1 hour and 40 minutes remaining. Instead, what we are going to do is we are going to review use cases that we collected prior to the workshop. So if you've been within the group that originally participated in the previous workshop, or we've sent the email around a couple of weeks ago, for those who just came to the workshop today because they saw it on the TDWG schedule, you have gotten the links to the document this morning with a link to the to the Google document where we collected use cases. So our first step will be to together go through a list of use cases that we have collected, just to get a feeling of the spectrum in which both standards are used, and then also by extension the things that have to be covered when we come up with some kind of alignment. The actual work of this workshop will be done in smaller working groups. And so the idea is to have like small working group. We have to see how many of you are willing to actually go into those and work on this. We hope we get several smaller groups that come up with actual results in the end. But before we do this, we have to select the topics for working groups. We have some topics as a suggestion already, but more topics are welcome if you think this is something related to the task at hand that needs to be discussed, and where a small group of people can come up with a solution. Then you can make this suggestion in a few minutes. And the work from the working group itself will be done in the following weeks. And hopefully the result of those working groups can then be presented at the TDWG virtual conference in October. There is a symposium for this. We have an abstract submitted to present the outcome of this workshop there. So there will be time to present the results and continue the discussion and continue hopefully after that as well with follow-up steps. So this brings us to the first part of actually reviewing the use case documents. Are there any questions so far, or any comments? Is there anything in the chat or in the shared document that I have missed?
Nothing in the chat so far, David.
Okay. Then I guess we, hold on a second.
David?
Yeah. Wouter, go ahead.
Yes. I raised my hand, but maybe you didn't see that.
No.
Yeah, it's for me. It's not yet fully clear what we aim to achieve. Do we want to align the concepts in both standards, or do we want to kind of merge these standards into one big standard, or what do we want to do there? Because these are really, there's a lot of overlap in terms of concepts, but I think Dharma Core is a standard that is, with its main purpose is to serve occurrence data, where Abcd is a standard to serve species specimen data. Although it's not completely clear, because Abcd also tells you that you can use it for sharing observation data. I don't know if it's used like that. And you also see that in a lot of specimen records are shared actually with Darwin Core. So what is the aim? What do we want to do?
This is also part of the later topics that are up for discussion. We thought about framing this workshop to just specifically focus on this particular question, whether to if we put this as a continuum of either just doing an improved mapping between those standards on the one side, or on the other extreme having at the end a completely new standard that encapsulates all the best parts of both of them, or some solution in between. But we thought that this might be a bit that might already be one step ahead of where we actually currently are. So this will the discussion on what should be the outcome of this working group in the long term will also be part of the discussion later on. I'm sorry that I couldn't give any more concrete answer to this, but as we said, it is a big task, and we are trying to strike a balance between actually moving forward, but also not defining steps during the setup of this workshop that people actually might want to discuss, instead of just having us saying, okay, we need to go in this direction.
So David, you have a question in the chat from Robert Sanderson.
Okay, hold on a second.
So it says, has a meta model been discussed at all to align both to individually, rather than the more politically charged task of mapping one directly to the other?
Partially. So the article of Steve Baskow kind of looked at the classes on a bit of higher level, but there was some discussion, if I remember correctly, on the email discussion following up the initial telco last year, where also those meta models have been briefly touched as well, but probably not in as much details as they could have been. So this could also be a topic of one of the working groups later on. So. Okay. So I will then open the use case document. Here we are within the use case page, and we thought just for a bit of change that the individual authors of the use cases should say a few words about them and quickly summarize them. So it's the people who contributed then sorry. So I don't summarize things that other people could summarize better. So can we maybe start with Anton for use case number 1 and 2?
Okay, thank you. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay. I deliberately selected 2 use cases which are a little bit, I would say, outside the usual data provider, data harvesting information flows implemented by GBIF, BioCase, and a bunch of other special interest networks. And the first one is the German Federation for Biological Data, GFBio, which is a national initiative providing infrastructure for managing biological data, for publishing and archiving biological data, mainly stemming from national research projects. And for the archiving part of this infrastructure, the participating collection data centers have chosen to use ABCD archives because it's a well-defined, standardized format for long-term storage of collection data, but also data publication on landing pages. And it turned out that ABCD is well equipped for this task. However, we had to specify a few controlled vocabularies here and there, mainly to improve interoperability between the different data centers participating. So that's one of the use cases. And the second one I injected here is a very specific, more BGBM related one, which is a couple of years ago, we have developed an Excel-based form, which is used by scientists working at the BGBM to enter collection data in the field or in more general in situations where they have no access to the internet. And this form is very much configurable based on 127 elements, which make heavily use of ABCD concepts and data definitions. And since our herbarium database, JAC, which is a system jointly used by around 50 collections internationally, since it is also based on ABCD elements, we can match them during data imports, which of course greatly simplifies the import process. So these are my two use cases I brought in.
Okay, thank you. Then we go to use case number 3. Steve, are you here? Are you willing to explain the use case?
I will. I can try. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah, perfect.
So just my background coming in here is that David mentioned the RDF guide, and I was the lead author on that. One of the things that was missing from the Darwin Core RDF guide is that there was no graph model. And I don't like to leave things unfinished, so I have spent a lot of time thinking about if there were a graph model for Darwin Core, what would it be? And in the document, I put a couple references here that you can look at. The first one is a book chapter that Joel Sachs and I wrote about essentially the problem of a missing graph model for Darwin Core. So just to kind of summarize, if you have different models, you can solve the problem by either making the less complicated one have an equivalent data model to the more complicated one, or you can have a more complex query. And so if you have 2 models, that's not so bad. If you start having a lot more than 2 models, then the query, developing queries to handle all of them gets like impossibly complex. So part of what I was interested in is looking at a linked data, at a mechanism for taking models that people of different concerns will use. And so the second blog post that I've listed there is a description of my attempt to take some data sets in GBIF, event-centered one, occurrence-centered one, taxon-centered one, organism-centered one. whenever you have sort of your own special interest, you tend to leave out the parts of the model that you don't care about and then focus a lot on the parts that you do care about. And so this was sort of an attempt to reconcile these different sorts of data sets. And so it was an interesting exercise. I was able to do that, but there are a lot of questions that came out of that, which is like, can you, if the data sets have a lot of missing information, one data set is missing information that another data set has, can you actually create meaningful and useful queries of the combined data sets? So that's another question. But anyway, it is possible. And so this is sort of the background that I was coming from when I wrote the blog post about comparing the ABCD model to Darwin Core. So I feel as though it's possible with using a linked data approach to be able to convert one model to another if you use Sparkle Construct. So you can either take the more complex model like ABCD and simplify it by dropping nodes out using Sparkle Construct, or you could take the simpler model and construct the more complex one by adding in blank nodes. So I feel like, at least in theory, it's possible to create a sort of automated, if one can identify which nodes are actually the same entities, which is what I tried to do in that blog post between the ABCD and Darwin Core. At least in theory, it seems like one could do this with linked data and with Sparkle Construct queries. So it seems to me that this is even more relevant now, because I've been sort of lurking in several different groups. I've been working a little with the Plinian Core group and sitting in on taxon name and concept meetings. I was at the collections description meeting yesterday. There have been a number of groups using Wikibase to do modeling. And I feel like TDWG is kind of at a crossroads where we have all of these different groups. They're all basically playing around with linked data and developing linked data models and for their own particular purposes. And so I feel like we're at risk of taking a situation where we don't just have like a Darwin Core model and ABCD model, but we also have a Plinian Core model, a taxon name and concept model, a collections description model. In other words, I feel like there's the possibility that we'll have so many models that the integration process would become even more difficult. And so that's why, like I said, I feel like we're sort of at a crossroads here. Can TDWG as a community develop a consensus domain model for all of the data that's common to all of these different groups or not? And if we fail to do that, then we just have even more models that will not mesh. The other concern that I have is that the solution that I've suggested is a linked data RDF solution. And I'm always sort of wondering, like, what's TDWG's level of commitment to this approach? I heard James Macklin's sort of intro to TDWG, and he brought up essentially a big linked data graph and talked as if this is kind of like the direction TDWG is moving. But like on the ground, when I talk to the people who are maintaining the infrastructure and ask questions like, so are we going to set up a Sparkle endpoint? I get answers like, why would we want to do that? So I feel as though we have to do some reckoning at this point to determine, are we serious about linked data? Is that actually the solution, or is it something else? And so that's essentially my use case is can TDWG have a domain model that can go across all of these standards, not just ABCD and Darwin Core, but to be extended for these other groups that are developing standards right now? The last link that I put here, actually, this is a very interesting experiment that Frank Michel did to take GBIF data and establish a Sparkle microservice to basically map data coming out of GBIF to the Darwin SW model, which is a little bit simpler than the ABCD model. But basically the idea was he did sort of the approach that I suggested, which is if you have missing bits of the model, then just insert blank nodes until you have a model, until you match the data up with a consensus model. And so I just stuck that in because this is an actual implementation that he's done that kind of shows that the approach of creating a consensus model by inserting blank nodes actually works. So I forgot to mention that.
Okay, thank you, Steve. A couple of comments from my side. First of all, that it sounds to me that like this goes partially in the direction that Robert Sanderson previously mentioned in the other question, coming up with a meta model that describes how the modeling on those different standards is done in order to make them compatible for queries, even while the different standards do have their own domain and focuses. So
could I make just a response to Walter's?
Sure. Of course,
in the chat, he mentions that earlier attempts to create a common domain model failed. And I'm assuming he's talking about the TDWG ontology. And I guess my comment about that is that the TDWG ontology was really a formal OWL ontology approach, which to me is a somewhat different than a linked data approach. I mean, they both involve RDF, but one is more involved in defining the entailments and things like that. And the linked data approach to me is a lot more of a practical approach where you just simply say how things are linked together. So I am aware that this was an effort that was considered to have failed, but I feel like in the time since then, you know, I made the comment before, you know, 5 or 10 years ago, if you mentioned Sparkle, everybody looked at you with a blank look on their face, and now you routinely go to workshops where people are doing Sparkle queries. So I feel that we are way beyond where we were the last time TDWG tried to develop a domain model like that. And so I'm not suggesting this is the course of action we should take, but I think it's a lot more feasible now than it would have been at that time.
Yeah.
So I have a question for you, Steve, that is coming from John Bitoric, who is kind of behind the scenes. He's asking, is there a list of mappings in addition to the Sparkle tool?
Sorry, I missed the last part of this sentence.
So he asks, is there a list of mappings in addition to the Sparkle tool?
Well, I don't know. I'm not sure that I entirely understand the question. I mean, within the metadata, at least of Darwin Core, there's a lot of ABCD equivalence properties where it's stated that this class or this property is equivalent to one in ABCD. So when I made this graph for the second blog post listed there, I just basically looked at ABCD and thought about what I knew about Darwin Core, and in my mind tried to match them up. So I'm not sure that there is any sort of formal mapping between the two, but I sort of guessed, and I think, David, you kind of confirmed that most of the things I said were mostly correct in terms of what the meaning were of different nodes within the ABCD graph. So I don't think that we have really a formal mapping, but we certainly have a lot of suggestions at this point of what those might be.
Yeah, so also in addition to this, I think this was part of the question where it says a list of mappings other than the Sparkle. So if you see in the document for the topics for the working groups, one of the suggestions from us is the architecture for mapping between standards based on existing mappings and solutions. And there we have a list of existing mappings in ABCD3 to other standards. So this is linked to the Wikibase instance where we modeled ABCD3. So yeah, when we modeled ABCD3, we used Wikibase, so the same software that runs Wikidata, to model the concepts and to apply some quality checks and to have all of the definitions and restrictions in formalized elements, which allows us to use Sparkle, for instance, for export to other formats, but also allows us to, in this case, query all of the elements that have a mapping to either related match or exact match to another concept. So we have like 80 something mappings in there currently. And this is like a really monstrous link. Hold on a second. So let me just put this up on the shared screen. So you've, hold on. So you've seen this before. So it loads up the page. It's the query engine similar to the Wikidata query service. And here is the mapping of the ABCD3 concepts to other URIs. So in this, you can see there's Darwin Core in there, there's Dublin Core in there, I think Audubon Core we have in there, and a couple of others, but they are only friend of a friend. This is only a partial list, so this is not a complete. We try to match as well as we could, also taking into account that even though some of the concepts are almost exact, they are not quite, because they have different interpretation on some detailed aspects. But this is one machine readable list of mappings that we already have. One other thought that I had in this context, back to that when you're talking about ABCD here, we have to distinguish two parts. So we have the ABCD XML that still exists in version 3. So this is similar to the previous ABCD XML version 2, probably the one you are aware of. And within ABCD3, we also developed the Abcd Ontology. So each concept has a URI, and this is the one that we modeled in the Wikibase instance, and the one that can be easily used for the mapping. And so the comparison that Steve did in the blog post was done based on this model. They are closely related. So we did the modeling really close to the structure of the ABCD XML, but they are a bit distinct with their own restrictions and caveats. So just that you are aware of this. I think we should end this discussion about this here. I see there are a lot of comments in the chat. Maybe this is something for a working group or later for the discussion. We are good in the time, but we should still still like us to move forward to the next use case, and later we have a discussion slot, and we see how we are standing in terms of time and the other task. We might come back to this discussion. So Falco, are you willing to present your use case?
Yes. Hi. As you all know, in parallel to GBIF, there is also a data portal for Earth science collection data called GeoCase, which covers not only fossils, which are also represented in GBIF, but also rocks and minerals that are not accommodated in the GBIF portal. And for this use case, years ago, the ABCD extension for geosciences has been developed, and the CTAF Earth Science group is now further developing the old GeoCase portal and being very active in this. We are actually looking forward to all the improvements that are published with the ABCD 3.0, and we also identified that an alignment with other ontologies like Darwin Core would be of benefit for those very domain-specific use cases like in GeoCase, because you can imagine that we are trying to represent the Earth science collection data as good as possible in the portal. So we are adopting elements from the standards, and we might come to some restrictions and identify some restrictions that would at least we actually need to implement some more elements from other ontologies in order to cover, for example, research data. A very concrete example is that mineral objects are actually identified or determined by its geochemical components. And there is always the question how to cover that with the standards that we have. And sometimes the measures or facts elements in both ABCD and Darwin Core, and even in the extension for geosciences, is not always enough. And so we always need to implement new elements. And the question is here, how the alignment of ABCD and Darwin Core could support the process of reviewing existing elements for such domain-specific use cases. And also, if we need to adopt other elements from other domain-specific ontologies, how would that be addressed in this alignment group here? I think ABCD 3.0 is already a very good approach, and this needs to be driven much more also from the standards community and not only from the domain specific community, which is actually meeting also today. Just a little advertisement here. The TDWG Earth Science, Earth Specimen and Paleobiology group, interest group is meeting today. Thanks.
Thank you. So this brings us, first of all, are there any questions regarding this use case?
There have been some comments in the chat, but I don't know if you want to address those now or in breakout rooms.
No
particular questions, just comments.
Yeah, I think this, I kind of followed this discussion along, but only briefly skimming over the, I think that's the continuation of the discussion from the previous use case. So as far as I could see, this is not related to the Earth science use case that Falco just presented. So that brings us now to use case number 5 for the DISCO modeling framework. Mareike.
Yes, I can start. Although maybe you can do it better since you are leading that task. But I will just explain a bit the background. So this is a task from a project called DISCO Prepare, which is a preparatory phase for the European research infrastructure DISCO. And in this task led by BGPM, we are kind of modeling specifications of the digital object, what Wouter already mentioned in the chat, where there will be a detailed session on later today. I cannot tell you when, but maybe after this session. So just as a use case where there will be, or most likely will be a combination of different standards from starting from Darwin Core, Abcd, GGBN, but also Audubon Core. But I think more details can be given by David.
Yes, so in the in the DISCO project, there is the task of a DISCO modeling framework, and so we, based on the experience from the Abcd project, we decided that we want to continue using the Wikibase approach and using Wikibase to model this as to use Wikibase as a modeling framework for this digital object specification, digital specimen object specification, and so there are basically two tasks in DISCO that come together here in this regard. And there's actually also a related, the Birds of Feather meeting that is tomorrow.
Not today, just
today,
directly after this.
Directly
meeting,
after.
yes.
So for the global specification for specimens, led by Alex Hardesty, that will also go further into this. So the idea there is that we come up with a data model that describes all of the data that is necessary for the DISCO project by reusing as many existing terms from other standards and putting them together. So to briefly put it, that's I guess for further discussion, I can also refer to the session right after this. So, and at last, again, Fargo.
Yeah, this use case is a little bit similar to what I presented before, but from a different perspective. The perspective here is the data models or data schemas for collection management systems. So as far as I know, being active since years in the TDWG activities and also in developments of collection management systems, the systems are always designed to comply with standards, to export the data in a standardized way. But what if we would like to create a collection management system or further develop collection management systems like, for example, the DINA system, with a schema completely based on an existing standard, like Abcd or Darwin Core. We might always identify there are elements missing, of course, but we always see that lots of elements for the daily work in the collections might be missing, and we need to be flexible in order to attach research data to the object data and so on. So this is where it is very similar to what I presented before. So actually the use case is here that the definitions of certain elements might be slightly different when it comes to the development of collection management systems, because there we might need some more details. For example, the full history of a collection object, of the physical object. How is that covered in standards like ABCD and Darwin Core? Is it just different exports from the data, or can it be covered in a full data set on a physical specimen? And these questions actually are quite relevant when we try to adopt elements for a database schema and change a little bit the perspective of just using ABCD and Darwin Core for exporting data, but also for the data models behind the software of collection management systems.
I think, if I can say real quick, I think the biggest hang up with that, when I explored that a lot, I think ideally we would always want to use a data standard for our collection management systems. But the problem becomes is that we lose data, and we don't want to do that, right? That's the worst case scenario. And it's troubling that it's like this double-edged sword where the ideal is to use a data standard, but the problem is we lose data. And part of the thing is, we have previous accession numbers, for example, at my museum. And we need to capture that, and it's not part of the Darwin Core. And so we have this deal where we export Darwin Core, but we want to make sure we capture everything at least at some level, so that collection management system at least has some flexibility to adapt to our individual collections. Because as we all know, curators are very opinionated about these things, and sometimes those collection management systems at that level are great to sort of adopt. We can customize them on the fly and do this kind of stuff. But at the end of the day, we export to these data standards, but it's almost like an impossible. I'm not sure that's achievable in any way, just because there are local variations, what people want, what people do, and you need to be able, the worst case scenario for any of this is losing information. We don't ever want to do that, right? And so I think it's, times change, we can put in new fields, we can do things, and these, core systems in our institutions are flexible enough to do all that. We don't publish previous session numbers, right, to Darwin Core because the field's not there, but we have it on our online collections portal, for example. And so, I don't think any standard on the other side can encompass everybody, what everybody wants, right? I just don't think it's possible. I think at some point you have to draw a line, I think. And part of this is always decision making, but that they just have two separate roles and two separate entities themselves. And I think the ideal situation is there, but I'm not sure we can ever truly get there. You know what I mean? Because we can't please everybody, right?
Yeah, thanks. I mean, I
know, you served it up,
I agree, and I just put the use case here because I think it should not be forgotten. Of course, we cannot solve everything with the standards, but I feel like there might be also restrictions when we raise some questions. What if my curator understands a little bit or has a slightly diverging definition of what's in preparation or what's in collecting event? So how do we make compromises, or should we make compromises? And that's all about this use case, and I'm looking forward to discussions on that, because actually in the DINA consortium, which is coping with the open source development of a quite modular and flexible collection management system, is coping with these questions and try to also question definitions that are already existing for years, and not only taking these for granted and just building the software around that, but also just rethink the use cases, the daily work, and try to improve both the software and the standards.
Yeah, so thank you both, Falco and Ben, for your contributions. There was also some related discussions going on in the chat, but as far as I can see, there's like not a particular question or something about understanding of this use case in there. So I'm gonna get back to the slides. Yeah, and we can, unless anybody else has some other use cases that we should discuss here now, we are okay on the time, but not, yeah, not too much. If anybody has some real big use case that we haven't discussed here, and that is usually getting overlooked, that now would be a chance. Otherwise, I'm going to continue. So let's now look at the topics for the working groups. Those are, as I already said, just suggestions from our side, things that yeah, could be discussed. You have the same list in the document as well, and there I guess there's been yeah, some additional remarks, and then a list for names has been added. So first we have the question for the architecture, architecture for mapping between standards. So what can we use to, let's go back. As I said, we already have some mappings between standards. There are other tables out there. I guess many are overlapping, some are contradictory, some are, yeah, some are missing some things, but the important thing is none of them are really properly accessible. So many projects have their own mapping tables. Some are shared, as I just showed you on the link. Some are just Sparkle queries where you get the final table. But there's no proper way of yeah, documenting, sharing, making those mappings as accessible. This isn't just an issue for our two standards here, but for other standards as well. So what would be a good architecture to just have those existing mappings and make them easily accessible to all users who are interested? Would the TDWG website be a good place for this? Should this just be a table, or should there be a more complex approach? So those are questions to think about. And as I said before, in the Google document, we have the link to the Sparkle service with the mappings of ABCD 3. Then once we have mappings, and what good are mappings for when you cannot kind of automate the transformation? In the end, all we need the mappings for is to be able to yeah, convert from one standard into another, or to get some common queries run on both standards. So is there a need for a transformation service that just automatically accepts any Darwin Core file and puts them in ABCD and vice versa? Are there, what would be the challenges for this? There are some approaches. I know Jörg has done an Pentaho transformation that does ABCD to Darwin Core, but not the other way around, if I'm correct. Yeah, would it be worth focusing the effort to this transformation, saying, okay, why do we need to make an overarching standard that covers both fields if we are easily able to transform into one standard to another? Certainly there might be some cases where there's loss of information, but if you clearly show what information can be converted and what information might be lost, yeah, this might be a good approach. Then what are the gaps for content that are not yet addressed by either standard? So we have, of course, some overlap between the standards. Each has fields that are not covered by the others, but what are elements that are not covered by either one, including their extensions? So kind of, yeah, improving our knowledge on the things we either don't know or don't have modeled yet. then what would requirements be for a future standard or a future standard development platform? So as I said before, both standards have massive implementations already. So we might need to think about backward compatibility. It might be all good and well if we have some really sophisticated standard development platform, but if it's really hard to maintain, then there's the risk that after the initial excitement, people are not using this anymore, and it has to keep up with changes from the outside, has to keep up with changes in the user demand. So then we have the use cases that you just described. So fulfilling the existing use cases would also be a requirement to measure any future standard or standard development approach against. So those are just some thoughts we had in this regard. There are certainly more, and so a group might be interested in working on those requirements. And this is the one that Wouter already mentioned previously. So what is our scenario for future standard development architecture, standard platform? Also going into the discussion for that Stephen mentioned. So how can we make sure that those standards, while covering different aspects, are still compatible in their general structure and architecture, making it easy to query multiple standards at once, combining information from both. And any other ideas that you might have, or any other ideas that have been mentioned here already in the discussion. So feel free to add any topics that you might find useful, and hopefully there are other people who also would like to discuss this in the coming weeks. Are there any questions about the topics we have presented so far?
No questions in the chat. There is Deb Paul has her hand up.
Hi, David.
Hi.
I am wondering about in all of this, I see a lot of technical requirements, but I'm wondering about the human piece. So an example would be that right now we have extensions. I can say from some perspective, they're highly underutilized. People don't use them because they don't understand how to, or because the software between their computer or their collection management software and however they get it out the door doesn't help them to understand how to do that. So I'm wondering where we meet that gap, because if somebody else put in the chat, I think Wouter, right? Talking about the need for more complete data that's not just from the core. But an example, I give a concrete example. People may want to share trait data, but it needs to go in some extension. They don't know how to do that. Part of that not knowing how to do it is how to get it out of their own databases. So there's a gap between the tools and the skills as well when doing this.
Yeah, that is a good point. Actually, we did not consider this. So the human aspect, I guess some of those things come down to documentation, and as quite often, our software and our standards, and I'm talking about in terms of the entire community, quite often lack proper documentation because it's usually the last thing on the list, and when time is short, then it's usually the first that gets dropped off the list. But I guess documentation can only be one part of the solution. There might be others, like training or things like that. So
one more part of that might be if you are a collection manager and you would like to know who else is using extensions, who's using the GGBN extension, or who's using I don't know, just name one, the determination, whatever, right, extension, there's no easy way to answer that question. So at any of the aggregators, if you go there, there's no box to check to say, show me the data sets where people have used X extension or Y extension. So you have to ask the aggregator people on the backside, hey, can you help me search for data sets, or how would I discover this? So that's another way in which we can, people need examples is what I'm saying, right? And if they want, then they want to use them, we might get more uptake if they had an example they could see and follow.
Yeah, certainly. I guess learning by example is for many an easy approach without having to contact people directly and requiring their time to can you please show us how this is done, instead of just looking how do other people do this. Yeah.
Sure.
I guess this, yeah, we should certainly add this to the list of topics. Would you be willing to phrase this, covering the different aspects that you just mentioned?
You mean put it in the chat? I mean, in the Google Doc?
Yeah, in document.
Sure. And I think Wouter and I are on the same page. I see his comment in the chat, so we'll
I see.
put something in there.
Thanks. Yeah, I guess I'm continuing now, and if you do have any further idea for topics, just feel free to add them to the list as well.
There is one, David, just in the chat from Wouter. Yeah. Says, what about a working group around serialization and packaging?
I see. Yeah. Yeah, that, I guess this is also an issue we haven't covered yet. So yeah, I guess this also is a bit of dependent for the format itself and how restrictive the format is. So Abcd XML comes with its own packaging instructions, being an XML schema. But I guess for the other more flexible ones, this is there are a lot of different ways to express Darwin core data, and looking at the serialization and standardizing those approaches is also important. Thanks for the idea. Okay, then before you now all rush to the list of topics and add your names there, I guess we would like to first show you the expected outcome. So what do we think should be the outcome of those working groups? How should they work? First of all, we would like to continue the work in this open collaborative fashion that the session itself is already using. So the idea would be that the working groups themselves continue to use the Google document, and you can either do this by adding a new section at the bottom of the document for your working group, or just linking to another shared document and do your work there. But the general idea is that the work from the working groups should be visible to all participants of the workshop, regardless whether they agreed to be part of your working group. So might be of use for some working groups to see, okay, how are other working groups that cover related topics, how are they doing? We already had a couple of discussions that are suitable for more than one of those topics. So those topics might come up, or those discussions might come up in one or more working groups. Please keep your work open. Each group should appoint a group speaker. So that doesn't really have to be a strict team leader, but just somebody who communicates the work of the group in the end. And it's best to yeah, do this to agree upon who should be the group speaker beforehand, just so yeah, to avoid uncomfortable situations when it yeah, comes to presenting the work. Keep in mind the use cases that we already discussed, and maybe some others as well, if you have new ones that you think are important. In the end, each working group should have a maximum one-page summary. You can link to other results if you have them, like other tables or I don't know, GitHub repositories, whatever. And in the end, there will be a short presentation during the October symposium of TDWG during the virtual conference week. So the symposium 1 is on standards alignment, and we have a session, a talk within the symposium to present the outcome of this workshop today. So ideally, each group speaker, if they are available during that time slot, should give like a really short presentation. We don't know the particular timeline and length of slot, but yeah, a couple of minutes, not much. So, and if nobody from the group can attend the main meeting, you can also send the results to me and I will do the presentation.
Can I interrupt you? Sorry,
yeah, sure.
we will have plenty of time during the symposium, so it could be even a little bit longer, the presentation.
Yeah. So this is why we didn't put any particular amount of time there yet, but yeah. And now the discussion, okay, what should be the deadline? Yeah, is a bit tricky, as there's actually not much time left until the main conference, and then with some yeah, time that is needed for preparation and also vacations from our side. We decided to have the 8th of October, so that is in a little over 2 weeks. I know this is a really rough timeline, and if for some reason your particular group is not able to hold this, then just yeah, send me an email. But we would like to have some results of the working groups by then, so that we can start planning the symposium in October. So, and now that we have, are there any other questions? Yeah, so there's yeah, regarding those expected outcomes.
David, maybe I would like to add that, I mean, you said in the beginning, it's really complex and difficult what we are here dealing with.
Yeah.
And therefore, if your particular working group cannot complete the topic within 2 weeks, that's perfectly okay. I mean, any intermediate interesting result is highly welcome, I would say.
Oh yeah, thank you. It's I see that my way of phrase that I expected to some complete outcome of the working group. No, that's not the goal. It's just have something to present, get the work started. Yeah, using the momentum of today's session and the next session, and yeah, of course, this shouldn't be over in October. So yeah. And yeah, now that we have this set up, I guess we give you a couple of minutes to yeah, add your own names to the participants list of the topics that you are interested, and if preferably add your email address if that's okay with you. So makes it easy for yeah, the group speakers to get all of the people together and I don't know, come up with combined yeah, way of working, and yeah, have an easy discussion. If you do not want to publicly share your email address in this document, this is okay. You can either send them to your group speaker, or if there's not a group speaker yet, send them to me, and I will facilitate the exchange of the email addresses with the group itself. So, and ideally, if you would volunteer as a group speaker, please indicate this there as well. And yeah, you are all adults capable of collaboration. I'm pretty sure we will figure things out and as we go along. So I'm now give you a couple of minutes to sign up here. Maybe you have some other follow-up discussions in the chat, and I will get back to you in a couple of minutes. Okay, so I see there's still a lot of activity within the document, and people are, yeah, in particular, there's a kind of discussion going on in the section for your ideas. Some of the discussions from the chat, yeah, continue there, and that's good. Obviously, we have found some topics that people would like to discuss. So I guess we, yeah, just go ahead and add them as a top level topic and add your name to it. And more and more people are signing the various other topics as well. I've seen some remarks that it's difficult within the next week in terms of time. Yeah, we completely understand. I know this is a short time frame, and I guess many of you already have other packed schedules. But yeah, as said before, this the group doesn't need to come up with a perfect solution for the topic or problem that you're tackling, just to go from this brief title and introduction that I have given to something more more extensive. How does the community landscape look like, and what other things have to be considered? So a lot of interest is in the topics about the gaps. So we have a little over 20 minutes left for this session, and actually not much other topics planned besides discussing the tasks and what you would like to do. So if some of those lively text discussions, if some of you would want to continue this discussion via the audio channel, that is also okay. So no need to type it out, and maybe get a bit more people towards the topic. So we are good in terms of time. Just as a as an offer. Since Quentin asked whether we are not going to go into breakouts, sorry, I should have maybe mentioned this in in the introduction, we thought about using breakout groups, but with a number of people who were interested in the session and the number of topics, and the fact that people would only choose a topic during the discussion, we figured this wouldn't really be feasible, because it's a lot of work to assign people to the breakout groups, and this cannot be done by us as co-hosts. This only has to be done by the people who have the dedicated host role within Zoom. So one person would need to individually put each participant in the corresponding group, we thought when planning this session that this is a lot of effort for very limited time within those actual breakout groups, which is why we choose not to do this. And
David, we can still decide on the speakers for each of the groups.
Yeah,
we should do this.
This is a good point. Thank you, Anton. So as people are still adding themselves to the lists, let's just hold on a second. Jumping back to the shared document. So here we have the topics. So first topic would be the architecture for mapping between standards. A couple of other links were added. So the mappings from Darwin core terms to ABCD. This is the table, and within this table there's a column TDWG utility ABCD equivalence. This is mapping to the X paths of ABCD XML, not the ABCD3 elements, but still this is quite useful. And we should do a mapping. We don't have a published mapping of the ABCD to X paths to ABCD3 elements yet. But it is possible to then go from this mapping to the ABCD3 mappings. I guess we can contribute some information there. Also, part of this was mapping from ABCD3 to collection management system data models like Specify, Arctos, and JAG. So, and Niels Klasenger wrote, but he's not available in the next week. Steve Baskov would like to observe the group, but cannot really contribute much. Tim Robertson is in the same position, Marta as well. So I guess there's a lot of interest in that group, but not, yeah. And Martin wrote that he is unavailable. His availability is unpredictable in the coming weeks. So this, yeah, still leaves us in the situation that there's not much, not many people who, as I see this, could actually, yeah, be the group speaker. Martin, would you volunteer to maybe do this despite your unpredictable availability?
I can try, but I will. There is a high chance that I will not be able to spend a lot of time on this.
David, I think, I mean, obviously, if I'm looking through the list, nobody has really time to I would say, to produce something. But still, I think, Martin, it would be I mean, if you're putting together in a document the existing mapping infrastructure, so to speak, like in Abcd3 and other lists and tables, and just present this during the symposium, maybe with a number of questions how we can go forward from there. That's already useful, I would say. So don't worry about not being able to produce new things. Compiling the existing things would also be helpful. And we can also contribute to that as well. So I've not put my name on the list, but we can contribute certainly.
No, that's no problem. It might be that that someone else needs to present it at the next session.
I will volunteer, Martin, if you don't want to do it, or if you can't do it.
Okay, perfect.
It's Niels.
Yeah, thanks.
Okay, thank you. So then we continue with the data transformation service. Yeah, Jörg and Christian. Anybody of the two of you would like to volunteer as a speaker?
Well, I'm not sure what the expected outcome is. I can definitely present what has been done so far when it comes to data transformation, for example, the Abcd Darwin core transformation.
Yeah.
Christian?
Well, I come from a user side using transformation service, and I'm certainly interested if somebody comes up with new ideas to solve the ongoing problem to convert the data from A to B and back. So this would be my input I would have to give. Actually, if you want to volunteer, Jörg, to be the speaker for our two-main show.
I can do, yeah, sure.
Go ahead.
Okay, thank you. So then brings us to the group about the gaps. A lot of interest there. Mareike already wrote in the chat that she has already left. Matthias, Holly, Carlos, Paula, Falco, James, and Paul with limited availability. Is anybody interested in being the speaker for this group? Anybody want to volunteer?
Then let's take Mareike.
Yes. I was trying to look in the chat whether where she wrote that. Yeah. No, I think we should find somebody who is actually actively saying yes to this. Yeah.
Right, I will do it.
Okay, Matthias, thank you. So next group about the requirements. This is Anton, me, Peter, John, and Wouter. I guess we can make this short as Anton and me are leading the session in October. I guess one of us is going to be the speaker. Right, Anton?
I mean, maybe somebody else wants to do it.
I mean, of course, if somebody.
Because I'm chairing the symposium already, so I'm not so much interested in giving additional talks in the session. Yeah, so, exactly. But I can do this, or we can do this.
Maybe, yeah. So if I think Wouter also already wrote in the chat that he had to leave. Yeah. But if Peter or John, if you would like to volunteer, then please go ahead. Otherwise, Anton and I are figuring this out. And yeah, and then the other discussion So a lot of the other ideas from the chat put here by, I assume, Jörg and Paula. Sorry if somebody else was working with this as well. Yeah. And so Wouter wrote that he would also be interested in mapping between the standards and collection management system data models. Oh, that's the one we already discussed. Yeah, that was already up for the first group. And then, as already discussed previously, the one about serialization and packaging. Also a lot of discussion about this. I also saw that quite a lot of comments in the chat were regarding this as well. So Wouter already left, but is there anybody who would be willing to actually do this serialization topic as a dedicated mini working group? I guess we leave this open. So also if you, the document will remain open and editable in the next time. So if there's some ongoing discussion and people think, okay, we are already discussing this, might as well be compile it in a short report, or somebody is has the urge to tackle one of those problems in the next couple of days, just go ahead and put it in the document. And our session is nearing the end, but we are not there yet. So if you have any other questions or discussions relating to this, just raise your, as Paula already wrote, raise your hand or just type the questions. Anything that we have missed so far?
So David, I have a question.
Yeah, sure.
So do you expect the people in each group to communicate among themselves, or are you going to coordinate that or send an email to everyone? How is that going to work?
I was hoping that the people within the within the group are able to communicate with each other, so that we don't have to centrally facilitate the discussions among the groups. And it's I guess the emails are a first good way, and then using the document itself as a communication platform might also work. Falco is asking whether there should be a meeting before the symposium. Falco, do you mean meeting of this entire group or of the individual working groups?
Yeah, I'm asking if there should be a meeting like this just for summarizing the results before the symposium. So in the whole group, at least those who are active in separate working groups. Is there anything planned, or don't you see this this is necessary before the symposium? I mean, I would expect that everyone reads each other group's document in order to avoid overlap and so on. But sometimes there might be some need for discussions, and I don't know if you planned this being separate individual discussions or in a group.
Yeah, that's a good one. We had discussed this, and I think we put it in the. Hold on a second. I have too many screens open. We put it in the notes on the next steps. Additional meeting prior or question mark, but we are not sure. And actually, honestly, I don't think this will bring much because it's with all of the people who are involved and being spread over various continents makes it really difficult to find a time slot, let alone in such a short matter. At the second point, I'm not sure whether this is actually necessary. So if you feel different about this, please let me know. Please.
And also, David, and also we for the symposium we have only one additional submission of a presentation. So actually we have the whole symposium for our group and could actually use the time to continue the discussion based on what the different working groups have achieved or have compiled.
Yeah, that's a good
I think if we all behave well during this meeting, this should kind of work.
So that is a good point. We have a symposium with 90 minutes, and besides our talk, there's only one other submission. So the default length is 20 minutes. So that leaves us 50 minutes that we haven't really filled, even if we are subtracting the general talk itself. So we can use this time during the TDWG week to continue this discussion in the various working groups. I assume many of you will be there, hopefully. So this, and also Paula wrote in the chat the idea that maybe having one meeting with all of the speakers and us, I guess we could do this. It might be a bit easier to find a time. And James has raised the hand.
So, just from the TDWG perspective, in the sense of interest groups and task groups and how to move forward on this. So, this is discussion a long time in need, and we're making progress here, and we'll talk about this at the symposium. And of course, this meeting is sort of the time when the interest group, task group kind of discussion should go on to say, well, how do we action anything that comes from this? We're doing it in reverse now. So we're having this meeting to get organized for a symposium. And so my question is, we have two interest groups, the one with Abcd in, one Darwin Core, lots of other related ones around the edges. Are we talking about post, after the symposium, are we going to see leadership to move towards a task group, maybe a hybrid task group or task groups that move some of this stuff forward? Just because, we need to move it forward somehow past the symposium.
Yeah, that's a good point. And we thought about raising this discussion here, and in the end decided against this as this group is still on a really vague basis, and it's so while there's a lot of interest from the various sides, judging by the action or actually non-action of the past year, we are really careful not to put it in the official frame of a TDWG task group or working group just yet. So we hope that we can continue the discussion, but we have to see about this. And at least for this year, it's not planned to start this as any kind of TDWG, official TDWG group. Also, Stan initiated this group, but it couldn't be here due to personal reasons. So we prepared a lot of this with him on the sidelines, so he kind of knew about this, but also don't want to make big strategic decisions about this group without him. So that was our motivation for not going down this path yet. We are aware of it.
Yeah, I mean, we'll need a champion. We'll need some people who are really dedicated to the task, obviously. And I think the symposium, well, this meeting, lots of people attending and contributing, and the symposium to bring awareness. Hopefully through that, we can gain some momentum and find some people who can, if we do a task group, a hybrid task group, whatever that is, we can build some momentum so we don't lose it over the next year again and come back to the same place.
Yeah, that is right. We really don't want to be in the same situation next year. So with a look on the time, this is now getting quite late. In the end, the time was a bit short as usually. So thank you all for attending the session and for all of your contributions, either prior to this conference in form of the survey, during this conference, or for your contributions to come. A big thanks to Paula, Holly, and Jörg for their support in the chat and in the administration of this room. We have the Google Doc for further discussion. You can also send me emails if you have something that you don't want to discuss publicly. We have the symposium in October, and also in half an hour starts the Birds of Feather conference on digital specimen that was already briefly discussed here. Then this evening we have the Earth Science and Paleobiology interest group. And on Thursday and Friday, we have the two parts of the workshop on the BioCase provider software and the GBIF integrated publishing toolkit. All of those are related to the topics we have here at hand. So we advise you to check out those sessions as well and enjoy the rest of the conference. I hope you had some interesting discussions, and we sparked a bit of new life into this group, and hopefully we have some nice results in 4 weeks' time. Thank you all for attending, and have a nice rest of the day and rest of the workshop week. Bye.
Thank you. Bye.